What if the international flight you're about to pay $1,300 for could actually be closer to $600? The biggest mistake I see people make when searching for flights is pretty simple. They put in where they're leaving from, where they want to go, their exact dates, and then assume whatever price pops up is what the trip costs. But Google Flights has some incredibly powerful tools that can completely change that. I'm going to show you exactly how I use Google Flights to search multiple airports at once, find cheaper dates, track prices, discover destinations I hadn't even considered, and even use Google's new AI search tool. And stick around until the end, because once we found a cheap flight, I'll show you the next thing I look at, and how points and miles can sometimes make that flight almost free. If you're new here, I'm Trinity, and this is Points and a Passport. This channel is primarily about points and miles and how I use them to travel for less, but finding cheap cash fares is another huge part of making travel more affordable, and Google Flights is probably the tool I use most to do that. Let's jump in. Okay, I'm going to do a demonstration of how I use Google Flights. Most people start off with their home airport, have a destination in mind, and already have their dates picked out. I live in Green Bay, Wisconsin, which has a pretty small airport. Let's say I want to go to Italy for a week, the second week of June, and have a preference for Venice, but I'm open. Let's see what we get. So it looks like we can get a round-trip flight with 2 stops through United Airlines for $1,364. That's quite a bit more than I was hoping for, but the good news is that we have some options if we can be flexible. By going into the departure section and clicking the plus sign, we can add additional airports to our search. Google Flights allows you to add up to 7 in total. For me, I'll add Appleton, which is another smaller airport about a half hour away, Milwaukee, which is closer to about 2 hours away, and then finally Chicago, which is about 3 hours away from me. Notice that when I enter Chicago, I can actually select both major airports there at the same time, which are O'Hare and Midway. Now we're coming up with $1,131 with 1 stop out of Chicago on Condor Airlines. If you don't know the 3-letter airport codes, simply hover over them for the full name. For me, the $233 cheaper fare isn't worth it after factoring in gas for a 3-hour drive, my time, and airport parking costs as well. Now let's say you're not married to Venice. Let's add Rome and Florence to the destinations. So we're currently searching 4 departure airports and 3 destination airports at the same time. This saves a ton of time versus searching these 12 possible combinations individually. Now we're starting to get somewhere. The top search here shows Chicago to Rome on TAP Air Portugal with 1 stop for $863, which isn't too bad and could make the drive to Chicago worth it, especially if traveling with others. It does show a cheapest fare of $833. You can scroll down a little bit further to see those options, but Google Flights automatically filters those out with really long layovers or multiple stops. By being flexible with airports, we're now saving just over $500 per person. Let's see what happens when we can be even more flexible with our dates. Being flexible with your dates can really pay off in a big way. I'm almost always looking for the lowest possible fares when traveling. Traveling during off-peak times not only brings you cheaper fares, but can also mean cheaper hotels and fewer tourists traveling when you're there. If you go to see the Trevi Fountain in Rome, people think it'll look like this, but in reality, it can get really crowded and actually looks like this. Okay, so just below the departing flights, you'll see the options for date grid and price graph. Let's click on the date grid. This is for when you're set on a pretty specific time frame, but can be flexible a few days before or after. We see our original June 5th to June 13th dates at $863, but now we see some options as low as $793 by shifting our dates and avoiding traveling on the weekends. If you're retired or don't work a typical Monday to Friday job, these may even be better for you. On the flip side, you can see the prices are higher on certain date combinations as well. Let's click on the price graph now. Price graph is for someone who is truly flexible with their dates. This shows the cost of 8-day trips departing on a single day. We can see flights for April 28th to May 6th as low as $658. You can also click the arrows in either direction to search different months. After clicking on the April 28th departure date, we can see the $658 flight on TAP Air Portugal to Rome, $699 flying Turkish Airlines to Venice, or $800 for a non-stop flight on American Airlines to Rome. You can also click on the date fields to see the price calendar. For this example, it's showing 8-day trips and the prices reflect each departure date. We can change the number of days in our trip by clicking the arrows on either side, and the calendar will update with the best prices for each day. And now we're seeing flights as low as $620. Just click on whatever date you want to see the details of the flights it just found. When we started this search and weren't being flexible, we had a price of $1,364. Now we have the possibility of flying to Italy for as little as $620. For a lot of people, $1,364 per person is far out of reach, but $620 is very doable. If you're a family of 4, that can be a massive difference and put seemingly impossible trips within reach. Now, out of curiosity, let's take a look at what the flights from Green Bay to Rome are now that we are familiar with how much the flexible dates costs. We're now seeing flights in April from $854. Let's click on April 21st and see what options we have. We now have several options within the same ballpark. Be mindful of the total duration of the trip and the number of stops, as that can make a pretty big difference in which flight you're more willing to book. Another handy feature is that Google shows you whether fares are low, typical, or high for the flights and dates you're looking at. This can be a good gauge to tell if you're getting a decent deal or whether it might be worth waiting to book. You can also play around with the filters to match your travel preferences. If I'm flying, I'd prefer 1 or fewer stops. I also want a total flight duration under 15 hours. A newer filter option recently added is the ability to account for baggage. Depending on the flights, you may see options for carry-on and checked luggage. This can be particularly helpful when flying budget airlines that only include a personal item and charge crazy prices for baggage, because Google Flights will factor this into the total cost. We now have the best priced flight that meets our flying preferences. Google Flights is also really cool in that you can add alerts for flights. In this example, it just shows the option to track these specific dates, but when searching and departing from larger airports, there will sometimes be an Any Dates option. You do need to be logged into a Google or Gmail account, and it will send you an email when the flight prices change for any alert you have set. I'm not aware of any limitations on the number of alerts you're able to set either. So you could do something like Chicago to Hawaii for any dates and just wait for a good deal to come along if you're flexible and not in a hurry. Another good trick is that if you purchase a flight with a refundable fare, you can continue tracking it after you've made the booking. If the price goes down, you may be able to cancel and rebook at the lower price, depending on the airline and fare rules. So we've talked about being flexible with dates and with several destination options. But what if you have no idea where you want to go, or you're looking to find the absolute best flight deal to anywhere in the world? This is where Google Flights really shines with its Explore feature. Let's start out with a starting airport of Chicago. If we go into flexible dates, we see several options. It is limited to 6 months, but allows us to pick a month or search all 6 at once, and then choose whether we're looking for a weekend trip, a 1-week trip, or a 2-week trip. Let's just stick with the 6 months and 1-week trip. It now shows us prices to destinations around the United States, but we can expand it anywhere in the world if we want. This is now showing us flights to Miami for $102, Los Angeles for $158, and Denver for $118. Be mindful that some of the destinations shown here involve driving. Zion National Park for $178, for example, is actually a flight to Las Vegas, followed by about a 2.5-hour drive. You can zoom in or out as much as you want to see more options. I also want to point out that these are not necessarily live prices. They can be cached from previous searches, but I typically find that they're fairly accurate because they're always refreshing. I'm going to click on Los Angeles now to see what the actual date and flight options are. If you're unfamiliar with the area, Google will also give you an idea of what hotel prices may cost. But do your research. I'm guessing you're probably not going to want to stay at a hotel in the Los Angeles area that's only $52 a night. Even if the dates don't actually work for you, Explore can help you find destinations that are less expensive from your airport and see what may interest you. You'll then be able to use the search tools we learned earlier in this video to really narrow down something that works best for you. Now let's say you're based out of Los Angeles and want to travel to Southeast Asia. You can enter an entire region or continent if you want. I think most people would not expect to be able to find flights to Asia for around $650. Here we have Bangkok, Thailand for $658, and hotels can be fairly inexpensive over there as well. If 1 week isn't enough for that far of a trip, you can update the search to look for 2 weeks. Using the Explore tool is one of my favorite ways to find cheap flights to places I might not have even thought to travel to. When I was younger, single dad on a budget, price was a primary factor. I can still remember my first big international trip I booked. I had always wanted to travel to Europe, but it was pricey. When I found a flight to Amsterdam for $400, I booked it right away and started making those dreams a reality. And you can be doing the exact same thing. The last feature I want to talk about is Google Flight's new AI search tool, just released a few months ago. This is still in beta testing mode, so make sure to do your own research and verify what it finds, but it can be helpful for coming up with ideas to get you started. From the main Google Flight search page, scroll down a bit to this AI banner. It references Chicago because that's the airport I have entered in right now, but it's flexible like the Explore tool. You just use natural language to describe what you're looking for. So let's go with looking for a 1 week trip this winter to get away from the cold. I want a beach destination with 1 stop or fewer, under $500 round trip. It now shows me 9 trips between December 1st and February 28th on nonstop flights out of Chicago. Key West for $319, Fort Myers for $180, Punta Cana for $367, and Montego Bay, Jamaica for $428. Let's try one more though. Let's search, find me a 10-day trip out of New York City to Europe sometime in May of 2027. The results default to the amount you'd be saving over the typical price, and that's how they're sorting it. We can see Venice for $562 and Paris for $554, among plenty of others. You can then click into any of those options to see the details of those specific flights if you're interested in booking one of those. On this one, we can see that the fare is pretty low, and Google shows us the historical pricing for these dates as well. So that's essentially how I use Google Flights. The biggest takeaway I want you to have isn't that there's some secret button that magically gives you cheap airfare. It's flexibility. Be flexible with where you leave from, be flexible where you fly into, and be flexible with your dates. And if you can, even be flexible with where you're going. We started with a $1,364 flight to Italy and eventually found options as low as $620 simply by changing the parameters of our search. But there's actually one more step that I take. Remember that $620 flight? I don't necessarily want to pay $620 for a flight either. Once I know what flights are available and what a good cash price looks like, I can compare that against what it would cost to book the trip using credit card points and miles. Sometimes paying $620 cash price is the better deal. Other times points can turn a flight that would normally cost hundreds or even thousands of dollars into one that you're paying little more than taxes and fees. If you're completely new to points and miles, I have a beginner's guide to points and miles that explains exactly how that works, and I'll link those at the end of the video. If you found this video helpful, consider giving a like and subscribing to Points and a Passport. I cover points and miles, travel strategies, and practical ways to make trips like this much more affordable. I'd love to hear if this video helped you find an awesome deal on a flight you've been looking to book. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep finding ways to travel more for less.